Imagine waking up in the middle of the night. The temperature is below freezing, snow is covering the ground, and the wind is cutting through the darkness. There is no heater, no electricity, no insulated house. Yet for generations, native peoples of the Great Plains survived nights exactly like this. And they had no secret technology. They had something much simpler, a shelter made from wooden poles and animal hides. But here's the part that sounds impossible. The fire inside wasn't the main reason they survived. Their real advantage started before the fire was even lit. When winter approached, they didn't just stay wherever they were, they chose their winter camps carefully. A bad location could make a brutal winter even worse, so they looked for places protected from the wind, near water, near trees, and close to resources they would need for months. Because on the Great Plains, the cold wasn't the only enemy. Wind could turn freezing temperatures into something far more dangerous. So, instead of trying to overpower the environment, they used it. And one of their most recognizable shelters was the tipi. At first glance, it looks incredibly simple. Long wooden poles, animal hides, an opening at the top. But almost every part had a purpose. The poles created a strong frame, the hides blocked the wind, and the opening at the top allowed smoke to escape. That meant a small fire could burn inside without filling the shelter with smoke. But they couldn't just build a giant fire. There was a problem. Fire consumes fuel, and during a long winter, wasting firewood could become dangerous. So the goal wasn't to make the shelter extremely hot, the goal was to create a small source of heat, while the shelter stopped the wind from stealing it. And then came another advantage: the buffalo. For plains peoples, buffalo were far more than food. One animal could provide meat, clothing, tools, bedding, and materials for shelter. Its hide could become a thick robe to protect the body from the cold. And those hides could also cover a teepee. So imagine the inside of one on a freezing night. Outside, the Great Plains are almost completely exposed. The wind is racing across the snow. Inside, several people are gathered together. A small fire is burning. Thick hides are blocking the wind, and everyone is sharing the warmth of the space. But there was still one huge problem. What happens when winter gets even worse? Because a teepee wasn't the only answer. Some plains communities built something far more permanent: earth lodges. Instead of thin hides, these structures used a wooden framework covered with layers of grass, branches, and earth. And that earth did something incredibly useful. It slowed down heat loss. Think about it. A thin shelter has to constantly fight the cold, but a thick layer of earth creates a barrier between the people inside and the freezing air outside. Some earth lodges were large enough for extended families. So, when the weather became brutal, people could gather together inside one insulated structure. But even the best shelter couldn't save you if you weren't prepared. Because surviving winter meant solving 4 problems: heat, food, water, fuel. And all 4 had to be handled before the worst weather arrived. Food had to be preserved. Firewood had to be collected. Warm clothing had to be prepared. And camps had to be placed where essential resources were available. They weren't waiting for the first snowstorm to figure out what to do. Winter survival started months before winter. And that's the part we often misunderstand. These people weren't somehow immune to the cold. They weren't simply tougher than modern humans. They understood their environment. They knew that a shelter doesn't have to be huge. It just needs to block the wind. They knew that a fire doesn't have to be enormous. It just needs to provide enough heat. They knew that an animal wasn't just food. It could become clothing, bedding, tools, and shelter. And they knew that choosing the right location could mean the difference between surviving the night and not surviving it. So when you look at the Great Plains today, you might see an enormous frozen landscape. But to the people who lived there, it wasn't empty. It was a map, a place full of wood, water, animals, shelter, and resources. If you knew where to look. They didn't defeat winter. They learned how to work with it. And that's why they could wake up the next morning, even after a night that could have killed an unprepared person. Because their greatest weapon against the cold wasn't fire. It wasn't the tipi. It wasn't even the buffalo. It was knowledge. Generations of knowing where to go, what to build, what to save, and how to survive. And when the temperature dropped below freezing, that knowledge could turn a few poles, some hides, and a small fire into something far more important than a house, a way to see another morning.